What's going on, guys, and welcome to today's video. And today, yes, we're doing more repairs or mods on the Jeep Grand Cherokee, but this will kind of be a universal repair or fix because there's a lot of vehicles with this style of drive shaft that, you know, at least at the dealership can only be replaced with replacing the whole shaft versus just a boot. So I'll kind of show you what we're talking about. This is the factory front drive shaft out of the new WJ there. And there are on these Jeeps at least quite a few different styles of factory drive shafts. Some will have the CV style joints at both ends. Some, like this one, will have a U-joint at one end and the CV style joint at the other. Some will be U-joints on both ends. So depending on what style you have, it may or may not need fixed or repaired. But like I said, other makes and models, not just Jeeps, will have this boot style on the far end or at least on one of the ends. Now the issue with these things is, if you guys can see, the boot is torn. The boot that kind of covers up the joint, yeah, there's a good angle. You can see the boot is torn all the way around. Now, at least in the Jeep world, there is no repair, at least at the dealership or repair facilities, for just the end or just the boot from the manufacturer. It is replacing the whole entire shaft, and those can be, you know, $300 to $1,000 depending on, you know, which vehicle you have. And I'm sure there's other manufacturers or makes that are even more expensive for a drive shaft assembly, but there are some aftermarket options out there if you are on a budget and not wanting to spend $1,000 on your older four-wheel drive or any vehicle for that matter. There are some companies out there like Driveshaftparts.com that sell repair kits. Now this one I just ordered a new boot kit for. I've got some grease, I've got a couple of seals here, and the new boot, the new back plate for it. We've got some hardware. Now they do also offer a complete joint replacement, because sometimes if you've let them go long enough, there will be no grease left in the joint. The joint will be dry, full of rust, and gone. And a lot of times they'll be making noise. This one still is really greasy inside the joint. So I just went for the even cheaper route of just replacing the boot. This whole thing I think was like 15 bucks for the whole kit with the grease, the hardware, everything. And I believe if you get the whole joint kit, it's $40 or $50. So honestly, either way, it's really not too much money. Now the burgundy Jeep, cheap Jeep, it had the same issue when I originally bought it, but since I knew I was building that one for off-road, I went with a little bit different route on that Jeep. I swapped out that factory style CV style drive shaft for a double cardan U-joint drive shaft. So if you guys can see, here is the front axle side with the U-joint, and then tucked way up here in the skid plate is that double cardan U-joint. So if you are planning, at least in the Jeep case, of going with a kind of more off-road build, this would be a good time to just replace it with the cool double U-joint style. But like I said, if you're on a budget and just wanting to get your Jeep moving again or not making noise from your drive shaft, this is the cheap alternative. So guys, I thought I would just show you the method here that I am going to use to replace the boot kit on this thing. Now obviously I've already got this thing out. It was just a couple of 8mm bolts on this end, a couple of bolts on the U-joint straps on this end, and this thing was out of there. So first things first, we will get all of the bolts pulled out of the joint here. And now we will need to use a flat blade screwdriver and a hammer and just knock the original end cap off of the joint. Now that we've got that end cap off, I am actually going to attempt to reuse this small inner clamp, because the style that they send with the kit I don't really terribly like that much. So I'm going to attempt to use this factory clamp. I'm going to try to get it spread open and reuse it. Now the next piece of this puzzle is actually getting this snap ring. I don't know if you guys can really see, but there is a snap ring here on the end of the shaft. And you will need some kind of, I don't know if I want to call them special tools, but it is some snap ring pliers to get that snap ring spread open. Now that we've got that snap ring out of the way, we can slide the whole joint off the end of the shaft, and you may have to use a hammer to get it knocked off. So after a ton of beating here, I originally used my hammer. If I had a smaller headed hammer, it would have been even nicer to knock the shaft out of the center as far as I could. And then I went ahead and threw a socket in so I could continue knocking the shaft through. This one was pretty rusty on the splines where the splines spline onto the joint, so it actually took a ton of effort. I've had these where they come apart super nice after you get the snap ring off. They just almost slide off by hand with a few little taps of the hammer, and then other times like this one that were very seized on there. Now we'll need to get the rest of that inner boot off there. And then we will need to knock this top boot cover cap off of this thing. So to get this front boot off, I just took a screwdriver and a hammer, knocked it down in between, and started kind of prying. As you can see over here, hammered, pried, and eventually got it worked out of there enough and could get this thing out. Now that we've got the joint totally separated, we'll clean up as much of the extra grease, I guess, as we can. And be careful, you can turn this thing too far and have all of these little ball bearings fall out of there. So just kind of be mindful working with this thing that you can overextend it and have everything fall out on the ground. We'll also, on the back side, need to get our original seal drug out of this thing. Since the kit is decent enough and comes with a fresh one, now we're ready to start assembling the new. We've got the new back piece and the front boot piece. And like I said, I'm going to attempt to reuse that original clamp, and it's a squeeze type clamp. So I'm going to try to spread that back open so I can hopefully get this thing put back together. So we'll start with the boot. We'll get that slid on over the end of that drive shaft. And then I'm going to fight with trying to get my clamp lined back up. So now that we've got that front boot piece on, we are going to put, a lot of the grease into this front boot area, and also quite a bit here on the front of that joint. Now the kit did come with 2 gaskets, but the original joint only had one gasket on the back of the joint. So we'll just throw the one on it and see how it does. Now, at least in this case, this joint was a pain to get pounded back on. I ended up with a big socket kind of over the end of the joint up and down on the ground, and then just pounding away to get that joint slid on far enough. But once that is on, we can take our snap ring again and try and get that into place. We'll go ahead and throw a little bit more grease here on the back. And then we've got that gasket. Then I like to throw the bolts back in. That'll kind of help get everything lined up. And then we'll take that back panel here and again just line it up over those bolt holes. And now, just to kind of start getting the both front and back kind of set in place, you can use a pair of pliers and just squeeze them together. But once you put it back in the vehicle and you tighten these down into the transfer case yoke, it will go ahead and pull the boot or this metal shield all the way onto the joint, and again all the way around. As you tighten, it'll just squeeze itself down. Now here on mine, since I reused that factory style clamp, I've got again kind of a special pair of pliers here, the CV boot pliers that I'll need to crimp that back down with. And guys, just like that, you can have yourself a usable drive shaft again with a good boot on one end. Now, yes, this one was kind of a pain. Those splines were really rusty. I had to, again, use a socket and pound the shaft out of the joint, and then going back together, used a bigger socket so I could pound the joint back onto the splines. So this one was not very fun. And I couldn't really show most of that on camera here by myself because I pulled the drive shaft here off of the workbench slash tailgate and was beating on it on the ground. But you guys get the drift. Knocking the old out, installing the new boot. So with a little bit of time, a little bit of beating on stuff, you yourself, again, can save your drive shaft, save yourself a lot of money, and not have to throw $300 to $1,000 in your Jeep or whatever vehicle that might be. Now, do some Googling. I have no idea what other makes and models there are these kits available for, but back in the day I had no idea. It was just you replace the whole drive shaft and that was it. Little did I know that you could buy these joint kits or just the boot kits like we did in this case and have a very usable drive shaft again. So hopefully this will save you guys a little bit of money on your Jeep or whatever it might be with this style of drive shaft on a little bit more affordable repair. So guys, I'm gonna go crawl under this thing, bolt this drive shaft back in, and have a four-wheel drive Jeep again instead of the current two-wheel drive Jeep that it currently is. And guys, as always, thanks for watching, and we'll catch you guys next time.